Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we've got a really difficult, complex stack of sources that a listener shared. It all details the life and execution of Franklin Duane Alix, a man executed in Texas for murder. But his conviction, well, it rested on evidence from this massive, horrific 6-month crime spree. Our mission today is to go beyond the headlines and really try to sort through the extreme conflicts in this case. You've got the killer's narrative of denial on one side, and then this, just overwhelming evidence from the state on the other, and a shocking legal challenge that pops up right at the 11th hour.
It's an incredibly intense story, and it covers a lot of ground very, very quickly. Franklin Alix was executed by lethal injection on March 30, 2010. He's only 34 years old. He was put to death for the murder of a man named Eric Bridgeford, which happened back in 1998. But, what you realize almost immediately from the sources is that to understand why he got the death penalty, you have to look past that one single murder. You have to look into this terrifying pattern that the prosecutors laid out during the punishment phase of his trial.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the specific crime he was actually convicted for, the murder of Eric Bridgeford on January 3rd, 1998. The court documents, they just reveal this terrifying sequence of escalation. It starts as one crime, and then it just moves so quickly toward deadly violence.
That's exactly right. The sources show that Alix began by accosting Bridgeford's sister at gunpoint.
Yeah.
Right in the parking lot of her family's home. He then forced her into the trunk of a car and, just drove off.
And he wasn't just after the car, though. He drove her to an ATM trying to use her bank cards. He couldn't get them to work. So this was clearly about money and control. And then the assault escalates again. He sexually assaulted her before driving her back to the family home, intending to burglarize it. He's probably looking for, electronics and other valuables.
And that attempted burglary, that's where everything just climaxed. The unexpected arrival of Eric Bridgeford and a friend completely interrupted Alix's plan. The confrontation was brief and deadly. Alix shot Eric Bridgeford in the chest. He bled to death. The evidence was really strong here. Alix himself later led police to the .380 caliber pistol he'd used, which he'd hidden nearby.
What's so jarring about this crime is how it was defined legally and then how Alix tried to redefine it himself. He admitted firing the shot in a death row interview, but he was adamant that he had not intended to kill Bridgeford.
Right, and what's fascinating here is that tension between intent and consequence. Under Texas law, you can be charged with capital murder if a death occurs during the commission of another felony, like a robbery or a burglary. So Alix's claim that he didn't intend to kill Bridgeford, legally it's irrelevant to the capital murder charge, but it was a narrative he just clung to so fiercely.
And he carried that denial right into the execution chamber. When he was strapped to the gurney, he did apologize for the crime, but he maintained, and this is a quote, that he was not the monster they painted me. He specifically denied being an alcoholic, a drug user, or a rapist. He summed it all up by saying he just messed up and made poor choices.
In his last moments, he was still trying to control the narrative of his life, to minimize the scope of the violence he inflicted. He was declared dead just 7 minutes after the lethal drugs were administered. But as you look at the documents from the prosecution, it becomes so clear why the jury saw the narrative completely differently.
And that brings us to the second, much larger piece of this puzzle, the scope of that 6-month spree. The Bridgeford murder was awful, of course, but the prosecution successfully argued it was just one incident in a really focused period of extreme violence. This is where his story of not being a monster just completely falls apart under the sheer weight of the evidence.
That is absolutely the key. During the punishment phase, prosecutors showed the jury that Bridgeford's death was just one of 3 capital murders Alix was linked to, all within this tight 6-month period. One of the other victims was a man named Christopher Thomas, and his family, like the Bridgefords, had to endure years and years of legal battles.
And it wasn't just murder. I mean, if you look at the comprehensive list they presented to the jury, you see exactly why the state argued he was an immediate, overwhelming danger to society. We're talking about 2 attempted capital murders, 8 aggravated robberies, 1 robbery, and 2 aggravated sexual assaults that were accompanied by 4 aggravated kidnappings.
That list defines a serial predator. And just to clarify, when we say those are aggravated felonies, robberies, and assaults, that means the victim faced the threat of serious bodily injury. It almost always involves a weapon. Alix wasn't just, stealing car radios. He was committing extremely violent felonies, one after another, for half a year.
Yeah. Given that, that sheer overwhelming evidence, It is so hard to process his continued denials. We know he denied being a rapist in the execution chamber. And in that death row interview, he specifically denied committing all the other crimes he was accused of.
Yes, and he tried to shift the blame for the sexual assaults completely. He claimed that those crimes, including the assault on Bridgeford's sister, were actually committed by another man, someone he sold drugs for.
And this is where trying to find the truth gets so messy. I mean, when the defendant is facing execution, how much of that denial is genuine and how much is just an attempt to rewrite history or damage control? It really asks you, the listener, to constantly evaluate the credibility of what you're hearing.
And this internal conflict is made even more stark when you see the surprising details of his biography that came out during the trial. This wasn't someone who had been a lifelong career criminal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How do we reconcile the man who committed that spree with the picture his defense presented? The sources reveal that in his youth, Alix was described as a typical, fun-loving teenager. He was really active in his church, he sang in the choir, he even taught Sunday school.
The contrast is just. It's truly chilling. A choir boy who somehow transitioned into this prolific, violent defender in such a short window of time. The sources don't give us a clear psychological reason for that dramatic shift. All we have is the factual consequence. A devastating 6 months that ended his life and ruined so many others.
Now, despite that overwhelming evidence of the spree, Alix's attorneys did not stop fighting, and they found a crucial angle of attack, one that focused on the evidence used against him for those other extraneous murders. This legal challenge, this is a real aha moment for you about how justice is really applied in capital cases.
Yeah, the challenge centered on the DNA testing. Specifically, the testing related to one of the 3 extraneous murders used to secure his death sentence. His attorneys argued the evidence was unreliable because it had been processed by the Houston Police Department's crime lab. And that lab was, to put it mildly, a scandal-rocked crime lab.
And that's a huge claim. It really requires context. The Houston crime lab at that time was notorious. We're talking about known faulty procedures, improper maintenance, documented mishandling of evidence. So any evidence from there was immediately under suspicion.
Exactly. And the court system actually took this challenge very seriously. Subsequent testing of that specific piece of DNA evidence, it yielded ambiguous results. The trial judge even ruled that testimony from one specific crime lab chemist was, in fact, unreliable.
Wow, so that's a major win for the defense, right? To successfully discredit a piece of state evidence used in the punishment phase, especially DNA analysis, I mean, that seems like it should have upended the whole death sentence. But I guess that's where the nuance of a legal appeal comes in.
It leads us right to this concept of harmless error. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals had to decide whether that one single piece of unreliable testimony fundamentally tainted the jury's entire punishment decision.
And their finding was that it didn't. They concluded there was, and I'm quoting here, no reasonable probability that the jury would have changed its decision just based on that one chemist's credibility.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the court was basically saying, yes, that chemist was unreliable, but look at the scale of everything else. They weren't just sentencing him for that one murder linked to that chemist. They still had 2 other murders: the sexual assault on Bridgeford's sister, 8 aggravated robberies, 4 aggravated kidnappings.
So you can think of it this way. The defense successfully removed one problematic pebble from the scales of justice. But the prosecution had already piled 10 tons of other reliable evidence on the other side. The appeals court concluded, without a reasonable doubt, that the testimony did not contribute to the punishment phase outcome.
And this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. What actually constitutes a harmless error in the context of capital punishment? The court decided that, given the overwhelming breadth of Alix's proven 6-month spree, the error was harmless to the final verdict. The other evidence was more than sufficient.
The legal complexities are profound, but the real impact, the human cost of this spree, is just devastating. We have some powerful accounts from the families who were there, who witnessed the execution, and they confirm the lasting consequences of his actions.
The victims' families were really there to reclaim the narrative. Eric Bridgeford's mother, Janie Bridgeford, she brought a photograph of her son with her into the witness room. She told reporters she needed to put a face to this because all the media coverage had only focused on the killer, on Alix.
That is just a heartbreaking and powerful act. Imagine having to bring a physical reminder of your lost son into the execution chamber just to make sure his memory isn't completely overshadowed by the killer's final words. It's a profound testament to their trauma.
And she detailed the devastating long-term impact on her life. She testified that the emotional and the economic damage was so severe that it took her 2 full years before she could even go back to work after the murder. The cost of that crime didn't end in 1998. It had this ripple effect for decades.
Yet, amidst all of that immense pain, we find this truly profound act of grace. Fernalifa Jolivet, the sister of Christopher Thomas, he was one of the other murder victims whose family was there. She spoke about forgiveness.
She shared a sentiment that is just. It's incredibly difficult to even imagine, given the circumstances. She said that they had forgiven the killer.
That is a monumental achievement in emotional processing. I mean, what was the reasoning behind such a radical act of forgiveness?
Well, it was a decision they made for their own survival, not for his redemption. She said, and this quote will stick with you, "If you don't forgive, it will consume you. It will eat you alive. He has God to answer to."
Hmm.
So that decision, for them, it provided their own internal closure, completely separate from the state's legal closure.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the conflict between Alex's narrative, the man who claimed he just messed up, and the court's finding that he was a poster boy for the death penalty, all based on this short, intense 6-month period of, well, unparalleled violence. We saw the legal system grapple with its own integrity, only to dismiss a flaw because the total evidence of his spree was just so overwhelming.
It's that constant tension between self-perception and accountability. He tried to define himself by his best intentions, or maybe his least destructive ones. But the court and the jury, they defined him by the totality of his proven actions.
And that leads us to a final thought for you to consider as you process this deep dive. How much does a person's self-assessed intent, Alex saying he didn't mean to kill Bridgeford and denying he was a monster, how much does that really matter when the totality of their alleged actions, the multiple murders, 8 aggravated robberies, the sexual assaults, when that constitutes the entire basis for their punishment? Is accountability strictly about consequence, or does intent ever deserve a seat at the table in that final hour?